Kenyans are coming from a point where the economic situation in the country was severely hit by COVID 19. Many lost their jobs, many lost their livelihoods. People are trying to readjust to that. Many started small businesses. Are you going to be able now to support those small businesses, or are you going to kill the small businesses via introduction of taxes and levies? Remember, at the same time, after this, counties are going to come up with their own budgets. And county budgets will be how they can also raise their own source revenues. And that will be affecting licenses and levies at the county level. So if you are operating a business, you're operating a business within a certain county, there are taxes that you're paying at the national level, there are levies and licensing that you're paying at the local level. Are you going to be able to sustain operating that business? Are we going to see more businesses thriving or more businesses shutting down? Are we going to see the country being able to actually finance this particular budget? Let's bring in two experts to help us have this conversation. Gabriel Okoyo is a director at Frontera Consulting, and Jurgen Muriungi is a business development director for Anglophone Africa at Delarue, and they're both joining us on the line. Good morning, gentlemen.
Good morning.
Good morning.
It's good to have you on the show. Asanteni sana for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Gabriel. Looking at this particular budget, 3.62 trillion shillings, and looking at how much the government has been able to raise through revenues in the last couple of years, do you see the government being able to actually meet the revenue, raising of the revenue, and at the same time, the budget deficit? How is the government going to be able to raise this money?
Thanks very much, Eric, for the question. I think one of the ways that we can see from the finance bill that the minister tabled before Parliament, government is attempting to widen the tax net and deepen the tax net. And by widening is bringing more people into the tax brackets, and we can see that by various amendments and that other taxes that they introduced in 2020, like digital service tax. So, for instance, they are saying that any business carried on over the internet, will be subject to tax. So they are widening the ambit of tax. And more importantly, they are also trying to make businesses restrict what they can deduct for tax purposes, like changing what you call, thin capitalization rule. Previously, let me just take a step back. They implied that if a business had a borrowing, if your business was for finance professionals, you can call it highly leveraged, where you have debt and equity in financing operations, you could deduct interest up to 3 times your equity. But now the government is coming in to say that they are changing the base of deducting that interest to what you can call EBITDA, that is earning before interest, tax, depreciation, and amortization, and limiting interest deductibility up to 30%. So these measures will ensure that there is more tax for the taxman to collect. In terms of spending, I think the government will still run a deficit because of the huge infrastructure projects that we have. I do not foresee a situation where the government is meeting both its revenue side and curbing on expenditure. And traditionally, heading into elections, we usually see government increasing spending. So I foresee the deficit to widen.
When you say, well, first of all, thank you. Some of that terminology that you've used actually just went over my head, but nonetheless, I take the view that we're talking about what is owed, what is not owed, what can be spent. Some of these new taxes that we are speaking of, or some of the new entrants into this tax bracket that we speak of. For instance, there's one you mentioned, digital tax. Did I hear you mention something of that sort?
Yes, digital service tax.
Okay, digital service tax. Explain this a little bit so that I understand what it actually is, please.
So I'll make a go at it. The digital service tax, government previously, the people who carry on business over the internet previously were not subject to tax prior to 2020. And in 2020, the government brought in what you call the digital service tax. That is tax on 2.5% of business that is carried over on a digital platform. That is, if you are doing the eBays, the Amazons. Traditionally, when you shop online and these multinationals, so to speak, gain income from Kenya or accrue income from Kenya, there is no way that the government is taxing them. And all the internet platform, the influencers, all people who are using internet, so to speak, to earn a living, the influencers, the digital marketers, the online shops, and all that. So in 2020, the government brought in a law to ensure that that marketplace, so to speak, like the online and digital platforms, the businesses that are carried on there, they are subject to tax. But the operationalization of that law has been a challenge a little bit in terms of, it's a new law, it's like a storm in a teacup.
Yeah.
You are trying to put in measures into place to, ensure that taxes are paid. And even the bigger question is that who is subject to that tax? Is it the person making the online purchase, or the person making the online sale, or the person who has the platform? Because you may realize, if I take an example of Amazon, maybe the person who is selling is not actually Amazon, but several, vendors advertise their products on the online platform, and then people buy.
Yeah.
So when you say that digital marketplace is subject to digital service tax, who is it to be taxed, and how do you collect that tax?
Jurgen, as we look at the budget, it will be delivered today. There's a lot of speculation as to what is going to happen with Kenyans' taxes. Are you able to say or look at what should we expect in terms of an increase?
First, I want to say thank you for the question, and then I want to swiftly delve into opinions on how the tax looks like and how hygienic it is, if I was to use the word. I want to quickly refer to your previous question on whether we think the government is going to achieve the targets that they have set for the budget. I will speak about this by saying the speed at which our appetite for expenditure has grown is not matched by the speed at which our economy has been growing. And therefore, we have been compelled as a nation to spend more of money we don't have, and then we turn ourselves into a nation of borrowers. I want to give you a quick run into that budget, and I answer the question specifically once I do that. If you look at the anticipated collection in taxes, it's going to be in the region of 1.668 billion, which is, 1.7 billion, give or take.
Trillion.
We then
Trillion.
intend to spend...
Is it billion or trillion?
Trillion, my apologies. Then we intend to spend 3.6 trillion. So we're basically not even raising half of the intended expenditure from tax collection. Now, even that 1.7 trillion is extremely ambitious. And I'll give you a good example why. If you look at excise duty, for example, we are anticipating to grow excise duty collection by 15% in the financial year to the region of 241 billion. Now, if I was to remind you, excise duty is a sin tax. It's collected from your bad manners when you go and drink your whiskey or smoke your tobacco. Now we've had a period when there has been serious shutdowns and lockdowns, and most of the entertainment places have been closed. If you look at the performance of Kenya breweries, for example, it will give you an indicator because they have paid 49% less excise duty in the last 12 months. So how are we imagining that we are going to even raise collection by another 15% in the prevailing environment where, one, the places that sell products that are excisable are closed. What we call spending power of the population has been reduced. People no longer party as they used to do.
Yeah.
So you cannot justify to me how you're going to collect 15% more excise when we are selling 40% less alcohol. That's one. Now, I want to go to the other taxes. We can revisit them, but I want to go back and answer the question specifically. Where do we expect to hit? One of the most ridiculous ones is there's a proposal to collect 16% VAT on LPG, that is liquefied petroleum gas. Now, you remember 3 years back, there was a general ban on logging and a ban on charcoal burning, which was supposed to address environmental concerns and issues to do with deforestation. Good move. We need the forest and all that.
Yeah.
But then the policy, if you formulate it, has to be comprehensive. So you don't, on one hand, ban logging, and on the other hand, increase the cost of procuring the alternative to logging. What you're doing is you're turning charcoal burners to illicit traders in the realm of bank traders. And to be honest with you, what you'll end up producing is a situation where burning and selling of charcoal becomes such a lucrative business for the underworld.
Mm-hmm.
So if your LPG is going to go up by 16%, if it's 2,000 now, you're going to have a 320 shillings hit on it. We are going to have VAT on bread. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
that means you have to shift to other sources of sustenance. Probably you might shift to solar power like the plant.
Mm-hmm.
So it's one good example of the fact that basics are going to become more expensive to finance increased appetite for expenditure, coming at the worst time when the global economy has been hit by, of course, the COVID challenges, and we have not been left out. Our people are also affected in the same way.
What I hear you saying, if I'm right, is that we are in to put it simply, a very sticky situation where, on the one hand, there seems to be this idea that is being put across by the government that they actually want to find new ways of collecting money, and yet the very action and the policies they're putting in place seem to guarantee the complete opposite. Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that's what I'm saying. And there's one very popular theory amongst tax collection and tax theorists called the Laffer curve, which basically tries to explain that taxing people more does not necessarily resort to more revenue. There's a tipping point where more taxes, more tax incidents, that means more percentages of tax being levied on the revenue, result to less revenue collection. A good example I'll always remind people is when there was an increase in excise duty on keg beer, there was serious proliferation of illicit drinks that caused quite a number of deaths and blindness. There was, the Ata Ukizima Tatu Tuendelea story that developed out of a tax situation.
Yeah.
It developed out of a tax situation when keg became extremely expensive, and what you suffer is something we call arbitrage. So the consumers tend to look for the next available alternative within their spending bracket. Mm-hmm. So if you cannot afford your cigarette because it has become too expensive, you go to hand-rolled tobacco, from which you deny government revenue. So you'd rather tax it at a level where the pain threshold is not too much to bear, and therefore you assure yourself of collections. But when you take it too high, you suffer slippage. People move into the next bracket within the illicit space.
Jurgen, there's a discussion that one keeps hearing in the energy sector that Kenya is able to actually produce more power than it actually needs. Okay? And that one would assume that if that is what we're able to do, then it means we become a net exporter. Yet, what one sees is, power cost in the country doesn't go down, it goes up. Okay, and yet we have, in theory, an oversupply. I'm sure there is some logic, there's a matrix that somebody uses to explain to me, but it defies any logic that I know of. If something is in great abundance, it shouldn't cost you more, it should cost you less. That's...
I'll give a quick answer to that question, an answer that most people will not like, but I'll let Gabriel have a run at it because he's a power person.
Yes.
So my quick answer is this: it's the ridiculousness of the entire setup. Kenya Power and Lighting Company is listed in the Nairobi Stock Exchange, right?
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
It is.
That means individuals, you and I, can own it and enjoy the dividend.
Yes, in theory, yes, that is how the theory goes, yes.
Let me get to the point slowly. Mm-hmm. Yet I fail to understand how we are charged money for power distribution in the budget, yet once all that work is done, private individuals are allowed to enjoy the benefit of the money that was spent in KETRACO and all those bodies to do the work. So basically we are financing private individuals using public resources. Now, that's a discussion we can expand for long, but that is the first stage in the ridiculousness of using state resources to finance a company that is listed. In essence, as a private company. We should have nothing to do with Kenya Power using state resources. Yeah, we should actually even sell that company to the various counties, split it up, because that monopoly is what has caused the problem. And then there is the understanding that you'll always receive financing and support from government, so you can become careless and mismanage whatever you have. So the answer to your question from my side is a total mismanagement of the whole situation. Because the people who sell power to Kenya Power make a profit. That is independent power producers.
Even
Yet Kenya Power makes a loss to sell power that they never
Produce in the first
to
place.
produce. Yeah. So Kenyan and Power and Ormat and Vika Power make power, sell it to Kenya Power and make a profit. Kenya Power marks it and distributes it using Ketraco resources, which are free, using last mile resources, which are also free. But still, in that space between purchasing and giving you power, they make a loss.
Yeah,
How do you explain that?
Can of worms there you've opened, Jurgen. But let's hear from Gabi.
Yeah, thanks very much, Jagan, and thanks, Latif and Du. You know, just picking it from where Jagan has said, we joke in our social circles that, you see, if the people who make shots at Kenya Power just go to the office and be nice, you know,
Gabi.
don't work.
Gabi,
Hello?
there are
Yes.
three of us here. There's CT Muga, there's
Okay.
Eric Latif, and there's Ndu. So start again.
Thanks very much, Jagan. Thanks, Latif. Thanks, Ndu, and thanks, City Muga.
Ah, Bas, now we can continue, yes.
Thank you. Yeah, sorry for the oversight. Yeah. So, speaking on from what Jagan has said, we usually joke that, you know, if the guys calling the shots at Kenya Power just go to the office, take tea, read newspaper, yani just be good guys, Kenya Power should not make a loss. Because the reason I'm saying this is, if you look at your electricity bill, Kenya Power charges you even foreign exchange losses or gains. They charge you for basically everything. If you look at the rundown of your electricity bill, there'll be there all the adjustments that they have incurred. And foreign exchange gain, they're charging us because they incurred some loans in foreign currency and we are paying our bills in shillings. So when the shillings and the dollars, you know, dance and there's foreign exchange losses and all that, Kenya Power passes such losses to consumers. So it actually baffles me why Kenya Power makes losses. And that is why we usually say that for Kenya Power to make losses, someone actually goes out, works very hard for Kenya Power to make losses. And following that, the president, His Excellency Uhuru Kenyatta, just formed a committee to investigate why the power cost in Kenya is high. And we see that they are going to review the what you call IPP agreements, that is the independent power producers agreements with KenGen or whoever they are producing power and producing power with. To me, in my humble opinion, I think the focus is wrong. The focus should be on transmission, because looking at Kenya Power's financial statements for the year just ended, they made, was it 6 billion losses? 6 billion shillings in transmission losses. That one tells us something. The transmission system is so inefficient that actually you are using more power to transmit less power. That's what it is. So for a company of its magnitude and of the resources it has, for it to use more power to transmit less power to consumers, something needs to be done. And again, reviewing, you know, having advised power sector and looked at the value chain of the power system, Ketraco transmits, KenGen produces, and other independent power producers, and then Kenya Power basically needs to connect domestic customers. For those who have tried to get electricity connection to Kenya Power, it's ridiculous. First, there is no standardization, so consumers really don't know what they're paying. And even it happens to us. If you happen to ever buy your power through the prepaid bill using, you know, same amount, let's just say you are buying a power for 1,000 bob, the units you will get, if you buy them in taxation, like you buy 1,000 3 times, there'll be very different units. There's variance.
Yep.
That variance, you try to call Kenya Power, no one can explain to you. So we really don't know what they're doing there at Kenya Power, and they should not be making the losses they're making. That's the bottom line.
Big questions there. We're having a conversation with Gabriel Okoyo, who is a director at Forterra Consulting. and Jurgen Muriungi, a business development expert, talking about tax. Is the government going to be able to raise and finance the 3.6 trillion shilling budget for the next financial year? This is what Okur Yatani, the CS for the National Treasury, will be presenting before Parliament today. The questions are, why does he need so much money, and where is he going to get the money from?
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day.
Eric Latif Nduoko, CT Muga, and joining us on the line is our two tax experts, Jurgen Muriungi, who is a business development expert working with Delarue, and Gabriel Okoyo, director for Terra Consulting. So 3.6 trillion shillings budget. And my question that I keep asking myself is, how does the government justify the need to spend 3.6 trillion shillings? If you look over the last 8 years, we've come from a budget of what, 1.8 or so trillion shillings to 3.6 trillion shillings. Year on year, what's the explanation that's given by the CS in charge of the National Treasury for the increase in the spending every year? Let's start with you, Gabby.
Thanks very much. Yeah, I think the obvious one is the infrastructure expansion. Let's give it to government. I know there are varied opinions out there, but there's been some visible infrastructure expansion. Although I may start with the elevated road that is being built, the superhighway, Mombasa Road, is a private-public partnership, so there is no, technically the government's money that is going there is very less. But there's been, if you go up north, the sites of Moyale, if you go down or the western part of the country, we have seen some considerable, expansion of new roads, tarmacking of all-weather roads. So the obvious reason why the government will say that the spending has been going up is because of the huge infrastructure projects that it has undertaken. We still go back to that, including, I see Eric is disagreeing, but we still go back to also that, like, we are net exporters of power, ideally. They will tell us, we've been doing all these, infrastructure projects. We have the Lamu port down there. We have something happening along they call it the Lapset corridor.
Yeah.
And of course, we also had the proposed oil pipeline, which has not taken off from Turkana down to Lamu. So the obvious reason, I think, and what is consuming the budget is the infrastructure. And then let me also not forget the government wage bill. You call it the operational cost of running government. For whatever reason, and I think it's still fresh in our minds because we are still in the COVID era. What the scandals that we've had, KEMSAs, NYS 1 and 2, and all this. Let's face it, this is public money that is being misappropriated into a few private individuals' pockets. And you see, when money is misappropriated, you need to look for money to cover the hole or to use it for the intended purpose. So the misappropriation, which you can call it corruption in summary, and the infrastructure projects, and of course the general cost of running the government, which has also been expanding. Because previously, as Eric has put it, let's call it 8 years ago, we didn't have some posts like the chief administrative secretaries. When you introduce such positions in your operation, which the courts have ruled to be, how do you want to put it, unconstitutional. These guys come with their PAs, they come with office and, cars and everything, the trappings of powers of such offices. So maintaining such a balloon executive, so to speak, requires money. So that is why our budget has been growing and growing. We don't know to what end.
Yeah, what I was asking that is, you can say, yes, there has been an increase in infrastructural development at the commencement of infrastructural projects. My question majorly is, do we actually see value for money for the increase in government expenditure in those years? Can we say that our budget in 2013 was X amount of money, it rose by X 100 billion shillings in the next financial year, and we can see where the extra money went to? Can we look back and audit and say, there's actually value for money? You can all see, you can feel it. Yes, we have seen the roads, but have we seen the roads that were meant to have been built? Have we seen expansion in the energy sector that was meant to have happened on paper? Is what's on paper relatable to what's on the ground, Jurgen?
I first want to differ with Gabriel. on his argument that, we've seen government build roads and do all those other things. And I'll give two examples to you, Eric. And one of the examples I'll give you is an example where you have a dad and you have one cow and you have your siblings and you like taking milk, which the cow produces. And then your dad comes and slaughters it so that you can have meat. So then the next day, you are all there. There is no milk because you had too much meat the previous day. So have we been trying to build tarmac at any cost? Have we been trying to build airports like in Isiolo at any cost? Like we are going to do anything, including killing the cow, to build that airport in Isiolo, which does not have any planes landing there. The other second example I'll give you to then proceed with this statement and I explain myself is the story of the dinosaur. If you look at the evolutionary stories, the dinosaur became extinct because at one time the damn animals were eating everything on their path and they grew too big for their own existence, right? So they ended up dying. Even today, you hear people dying of cardiac arrest and other weight-related issues just because of excessive consumption. The question that I would want to ask is, are we driving our appetite for built infrastructure too much so that it's not matched with the rate at which the rest of the economy is growing, to the extent where we'll end up having many ghost airports, many roads leading to nowhere, and many railway lines leading to nowhere? For me, the biggest concern here is, are we developing the rest of the economy at the same pace? Would we say there's enough appetite to build as many referral hospitals and as many cottage industries and EPZ zones as we are building the roads? The answer will be no. So what will the road be transporting if we don't have cottage industries that will be feeding that road with produce? If the agricultural sector is not developed at the same pace, such that we have enough produce to be taken to the market and to be taken to the ports for export. So we build ports that end up turning us into a serious importer of products made from India and China and the rest of the places, because in the process of trying to allocate money to build the port and the airport, we ignored the producer end of our economy. We ignored the agricultural support programs. We ignored the education sector, so the children are not becoming good entrepreneurs. So if I was then to go back to the question, Eric, you asked, you spoke as if you are one of these guys who are auditors like myself. In a public sector audit, there are three questions that you always try to answer: economy, efficiency, and effectiveness. So when we talk about the efficiency, sometimes we call it efficacy. Is this project the best project for the people of that place? If, for example, I go to Lake Victoria and build a dam near the lake, that would be the height of ridiculousness, right? But I could go and build a dam in Aurora. So that is the efficiency of the project. It's efficient for the places being set up. But in terms of the economy, we had 23 billion shillings being lost in a dam that never took off. Even mobilization of equipment never happened. Now, that was not an economical project at all. If you're going to do a railway line and there are no goods to transport on that railway line, then there's no effectiveness. It's not an effective project and there's no economy in it. So the biggest problem we've had, even if Gabe says we need roads, which I agree, is that we've been doing these projects at 3, 4, 5 times the price they would ideally cost. I would not be stupid enough to compare our situation with the situation in Ethiopia and Tanzania, because the Tanzania SGR cost much less, the Ethiopia SGR cost much less, but I appreciate the fact that in those two countries, there's no compensation for land, and if it's there, it's minimal. So land drove the prices up. But we've read and heard and seen cases in court where officers charged with the responsibility to oversee the compensation of land would approach you as a landowner and strike a deal where they triple the price so that they get a cut. So our projects, whether well intended or not, have not been economical. Number two, we have got excessive appetite for huge infrastructure projects because they present a huge opportunity for kickbacks. Right? So if we can tame that appetite for excessive appetite for huge infrastructure projects, and if we can tame the appetite for doing projects that sometimes are not clearly thought out, like the many others you've had, including the tunnels of the dam that was being done in Muranga, then we would be doing well. So right now, we're in that situation where, yes, we are spending a lot of money on these projects. They might be well-intentioned or not. They are not economical, and some of them even are not being done with the right rigor in mind.
So,
and to close this...
go ahead, Jurgen, sorry.
Sorry, Andrew. To just close this statement, I'll just say that if you reflect back and see the number of many good projects that have been launched and they have been abandoned or orphaned midstream because they were not offering opportunity for kickbacks, you will agree with me that what I'm saying is true. One example is the laptops project. What happened to it? Has there been a report tabled on what happened to it? Everyone was excited about COVID supplies. Then the moment the money that was allocated was exhausted, a lot of that PPE is laying at KEMSA, 4.2 billion that they cannot distribute because no one can buy it because they overpriced the purchases. I will continue and I can give you 10, but I can assure you all of them speak to one thing. There was a lot of appetite at the onset when there was either a lot of financing or there was the capex part. But when it comes now to the softer issues around now, the proper implementation, people abandon it and move to the next big project.
Now, if this is clear, because if you're coloring within the lines of logic, what you're saying anybody can. I mean, from what you're talking about now, in terms of clearly you cannot spend more than you have. You cannot triple the cost of a project and then expect to get some value for it later. It just won't happen, and anybody who sees this can figure it out. So then, how on earth do we explain that still you then want to be able to finance a budget, and we're looking at those numbers? 2.04 trillion shillings from this budget is expected to come from taxes and ministerial activities. This is what we are being told right now. More than half of that amount will still come from taxes from an already burdened and depressed economy. It sounds as though something is just being said because it needs to be said, but in the reality of things and really getting to the nitty-gritty of it, it won't happen. It cannot happen. We will get to the place whereby we will not be able to meet budget. Last year, at the end of the fiscal year, there was money that was given in order to meet budget obligations from that year. I see it going in the same direction, that you will not be able to collect, the country will not be able to collect on these supposed taxes of 2.04 trillion. And then you will get to the place whereby the begging bowls are retrieved and put out there for help to complete the fiscal year. How is it possible that you have so many people working on a budget process and then are not able to apply these clear truths? How?
Okay.
I'm not...
Both of you,
Sorry,
I guess.
Gabby,
Yeah, I can take that first, and I agree with you entirely. What you've said is very true. First, the KRA, which is the primary revenue collecting body, is given targets by the National Treasury, and by law, it says that they need to get the 2% of what they are collecting as their operational, money, which they are not getting anyway. Secondly, government is, let me call it, ambitious, because even if you look at the economic projections amid the depressed, economic activities, and let's face it, because of the harsh tax environment and the overly aggressiveness of the KRA, we are seeing capital flight as we speak. Looking at it from a consultant's perspective, we are seeing people relocating, investors relocating their businesses from Kenya to other regions. We have also seen investments that were initially intended for, let's call it the Kenyan market, either basing themselves in Tanzania or Ethiopia. And a good example, and an example in point, is the Tilenga project in Uganda. Previously, the oil pipeline from Hoima was to pass through Turkana en route to Lamu. But because of our expensive, you can call it land acquisition policies or whichever differences we had with our neighbors, the pipeline is taking the longer route through to Tanga. And this is just one example of the capital flights because of the not so ease of doing business, the aggressiveness of the authorities that, should be, how do we call it, making doing business in Kenya easy. Though Kenya did improve, if you look at the World Bank rankings on the ease of doing business, I think we improved to position 63 from somewhere in 98. Still, if you compare setting up or complying with the statutory requirements in, let's say, Kenya and Rwanda, complying in Rwanda is far much easier and direct and less expensive as opposed to complying with the statutory permits, business registration, compliance, returns in Kenya. So, and amidst all this, we still have a lofty revenue targets. And if you look at the trends of Kenya Revenue Authority trying to meet the revenue collection targets that has been provided by the National Treasury, they have consistently failed to meet targets. And I think I can say with more certainty that even in these 2.4 revenue collection trillion that they've been given, I don't think they will meet it. And if they meet it, then the people who are paying the taxes will have really, really reduced. Because I usually say to my colleagues on the other side of tax administration that the relationship between the taxpayer and the tax administrator is that of a symbiotic relationship. It's like a tick and a cow. You know, a tick should not suck so much blood such that the cow dies, because eventually the tick will die when it will not have any more cows to suck from. And that is what the revenue administrators need to know. And similar to the government, we should not, currently as we speak, there is a court order. Of course, we can't go into much details on it, staying the tax that was introduced by government called minimum tax. Technically, the government was saying that everyone should pay their fair share of taxes. So even if you're making losses, you need to pay something small in terms of minimum tax. And its implementation was not correct because let's say there was no window
Mr.
period
Okoyo,
to say.
are you saying the government wants to tax losses?
Indeed, they are. Other than the courts are the ones that have saved the taxpayers, so to speak.
That was the plan.
Because the government said
That was the plan, to tax losses.
1%.
it is actually in law, not just the plan. It is
It's
in law. Yes.
Okay, I get you.
Yeah.
But I also have a problem with this ranking that you speak of. You say we improved on some index or the other. When you say we improved, are there details to explain whether it is that our economic performance improved, or is it that those in that particular index did worse than we did, so they declined? What really do we look at?
No, I think we look at various parameters, and one of it that I might give credit to the government is the introduction of e-citizen, where now you can actually, schedule an appointment to go do something at Huduma Center, and again you can, do a lot of your stuff online. Let's take a simple example of you are trying to get a business permit for expatriates or something like, or even you applying for a passport. You log into e-citizen, create an account, fill in the forms, make the payment via M-Pesa, and then print the already completed documents, schedule an appointment also online to go to Huduma Center or to go make a queue at Nyayo House to get your passport. So all these are also being, looked at when you're looking at ease of doing business. So we have a little bit improved, and Kenya also being up there in the tech world, it's also helping with, you can pay your taxes from your phone. You don't have to go line at previously the other two banks that were more or less state-owned to pay taxes. Because let's face it, like this, 12 years or 20 years ago, not even 20, because I've started practicing tax, which is over a decade ago, sometimes just complying was such a hassle.
It was a week-long affair.
It was a week-long affair. You have to go queue, get this form, fill it, go pay there. But now, you can easily do that from the comfort of your office on your phone. So such parameters go into looking at ease of doing business.
Jurgen, let me ask you this question, if I may. Clearly, this situation where we are in, where our key focus seems to be on debt repayment rather than on development, and when it comes to development spending, it's perhaps development whose need is questionable. What ought to be done so that the economic activities that are supposed to spur the income in this particular economy, what are the simple steps that the government can do, or what are the things that it is doing that it can stop doing to ensure that at least there's a breath, there's some breath of air that is breathed into this economy so that it can actually start moving forward?
Thank you. I think every time I sit down with my friends, I pontificate about the various things that we failed to do. And I'll now quickly outline them, and you feel free to stop me if I'm moving too fast. One, there's this question of counties. Can we have a structured manner in which counties are financed, as opposed to you being given 8 billion, 12 billion, and then we see Sonko, sorry to use this as an example, dishing out wads of cash in Dubai, for God's sake. Like, how ridiculous can we be? We are a poor country. You're in a third world country. You represent the people. You're on a taxpayer's bill. You're dishing out cash in the street. Now, can we then have a situation where the transfer of cash to the counties is structured? So, for example, I'll give you a good example. If we were to say every county should have a level 5 hospital, can we start by identifying those counties that do not have level 5 hospitals and making their budget focused on that? So in as much as you're going to be allocated your fair share, then your fair share is capped to certain areas of expenditure. That way, this question of if efficiency of projects is catered for. So then there is this decision here that county number 36 lacks a referral hospital, and we made a national policy that every county should have a referral hospital. This year, their budget will go towards that. Outside salaries, we don't want to see a county with the 6 rivers digging boreholes. That's number one. Number two, we stop taxing producer items. I'm talking about your LPG. I'm talking about your petroleum. No one drinks petroleum. And if anything, by the way, even if you are to have 5 cars, you can't drive all of them at the same time because petrol is cheap. But this is a producer item. You drive your car to go to work. It's diesel powering a factory to produce products for sale. LPG, no one chews LPG. You buy LPG either because you're a hotel, you're a restaurant, or even for use in your own home as a productive citizen. And also, it serves a purpose of saving the alternative sources of energy from depletion. So we stop taxing consumer and in fact taxing raw materials or products that go into production. Then number 3, we look at the state institutions that should be revenue generating and are doing badly. And a good example is Kenya Airways. We stop throwing good money after bad money. My apologies. So we must have a structured approach as if industries are failing, what is our recovery mechanism? Not every year passing an allocation of money without critical questioning of what is the institutional structure, what is the governance structure in that institution which is not working. Number 3 is the cottage industry. We no longer have a vibrant cottage industry because of the influx of the Chinese. Now, the question is, how do we foster the growth of this one? I saw on social media, there were various memes doing rounds of how people closed their water bottling plants because of the various levies. All right?
Yep.
Do we have a structured approach which is saying, since we have a minimum tax, since we have a monthly rental income tax which allows you to minimize your administrative burden on your maybe small houses you've built, can we have a similar setup where the cottage industries are exempted from most of the complexities of compliance? You have your KEBS levy, you have your county government levies, then you have NEMA, then you have got national government taxes. Can we have a structure where maybe through Huduma Center you are told if you start a plant for maybe bottling of water, your total expenditure is not more than 2 million, you will be required only to pay 3% to get a license, and you are free to operate and do everything that is required to be done. That will spur some growth. And if you allow me to close by saying this, no state has ever taxed itself out of poverty. So Gabi spoke about the way we have minimum tax and all.
Yeah.
I would always want to urge whoever is in a position where they're formulating policy to always remember the origin of taxation was in the ancient kingdoms, where kings would expect the harvest to be delivered to their courts to feed their servants and all that. You only deliver during harvest, even in the Bible. For those who read the Bible, like during the harvest period is when there would be festivities,
Yes.
and
That's
people
true.
would come with the first harvest of your wheat and everything else, and you bring your sheep. You are not going to bring nothing.
I think we've lost Jurgen.
No, sorry, I'm saying if there is no harvest, you are not going to bring anything. So if you are making losses, we must question ourselves why we want to tax a loss-making institution.
That's true.
What do we want to achieve from it? Are we going to compel you to take a loan from your bank so that you can pay tax? Because if you're making a loss, that means there's no money in your reserves.
Jurgen,
So
very
that's
many
very
questions that you've asked there, and thank you very much for joining us today. We've run out of time. Let's see what the CS speaks about in the Parliament this afternoon. And hopefully, then we can have this conversation, part B of reviewing what the CS has said. I want to thank you very much, gentlemen, for joining us. Jurgen Muriungi and Gabriel Okoyo, both tax administration experts. Asanteni sana.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Right. Good morning. It's now 8 a.m.
This is the Situation Room, the only way to start your day. Spice up your life.